Welcome to episode 3 of the Kofford AuthorCast. The Kofford AuthorCast is a quick and easy way to connect with our authors through audio interviews and readings of their books. In this episode, Mormon philosopher and theologian Adam Miller reads 2 chapters, Recompense and Benedictus, from his book, the critically acclaimed Rube Goldberg Machines, Essays in Mormon Theology, available in paperback at gregkofford.com.
Benedictus. The theologian is indispensable. She is the not thoughtless. She takes no thought because she gives it, and the more she gives it away, the more it multiplies. As the not thoughtless, she is the never bored. She loves people more than things, and things more than words. She loves people by loving words and things. Her words pierce the rotten diction of tradition and dogma and creed, and fasten once again words to things and things to people. She faithfully repeats what she is told by never faithfully repeating it. She reads the Bible by writing a new one. No sermon is too long, no text is too dry, no lesson too familiar, no claim too self-congratulatory that she cannot read in it the word of the Lord. When she reads right off the edge of the page and onto her desk and into the yard and out under the sun. When she writes right off the edge of her page and onto her desk and up her arm and into her heart. Her arms are tattooed with a fine scrawl of unrepeating names for God's grace. Her body is an unboxed tefillin, her eyes open. She loves losing arguments. Living, she never ceases to die. The subtext of her every word is the sacred syllable Om. Her cells, making copies of themselves, hum it as they work. Not the moon, but a finger pointing at the moon. She induces the synesthesia of saving doubt and speculative confidence and valid inference. Still pointing, she smells what she sees, hears what she feels, and touches what she tastes. All day long she sacrifices her thoughts on the horns of life's altar, burns them without hesitation as incense, eats them without regret as showbread, working by theology toward that place where her thoughts end, and she parts the veil, and she clasps her child's bare hand. She is indispensable. She is the reason for the other reasons, and as such she embodies that place where the rational and the absurd touch. She is God's work in glory. She is that thing she had never dared suppose. She is nothing. Recompense. Spurred by George Hanley's book Home Waters, I've been reading Wallace Stegner. Like Hanley, Stegner is interested in the tight twine of body, place, and genealogy that makes a life. On my account, Hanley and Stegner share the same thesis. If the body is a river, then the soul is a watershed. Like a shirt pulled off over your head, this thesis leaves the soul inside out and exposed. You thought your soul was a kernel of atomic interiority, your most secret secret, but as you stand there, shirt in hand, everyone can see your navel. Stegner's novel Angle of Repose opens with the narrator's own version of this thesis. An aging father writing about his pioneer grandparents names the distance between himself and his son. Quote, "Right there I might say to Rodman, who doesn't believe in time, notice something. I started to establish the present, and the present moved on. What I established is already buried under layers of tape. Before I can say I am, I was. Heraclitus and I, prophets of flux, know that flux is composed of parts that imitate and repeat each other. Am or was, I am cumulative too. I am everything I ever was, whatever you and Leah may think. I am much of what my parents, and especially my grandparents, were. Inherited stature, coloring, brains, bones, that part unfortunate. Plus transmitted prejudices, culture, scruples, likings, moralities, and moral errors that I defend as if they were personal and not familial." End quote. Right off, Stegner fingers what is different about this notion of a soul. Time. Thinking that souls are tucked away inside us generally goes hand in hand with thinking that they are untouched by time. Dammed up inside, the soul, unmoved, is safe from the perpetual rush and tumble of Heraclitus's Panta-ray. But wrong side out, the soul has no such repose. Here nothing is still, and the soul's I am is both compromised and constituted by its temporality. It moves, but its movement is composed of parts that imitate and repeat each other. It moves, but it moves as a gathering litany of brains, bones, beliefs, scruples, and prejudices, copied from the bodies and lives of parents and grandparents, channeled through the narrow straits of my canyon walls. As Hanley points out, quote, "This is the way with watersheds. They gather tributaries from upstream and connect all that is above, beneath, and beside, and give life through unseen processes of exchange." End quote. Downstream, the river appears self-sufficient, its banks clearly defined, its water an unremarkable grace, but the accessible obscures the obvious. Quote, "A river is water, yes, but it is also soil, plant, and animal life, a watershed." End quote. The soul is a body, yes, but it also has a place and a time. A soul, like water, quote, "seeps through the edges of stone, leaps out of rocky walls, or surges from beneath the soil, and it grows in size and momentum as it flows downward from the tops of the mountains. Little capillaries of water meet up with others to form small rivulets and streams, which meet others still and naturally form transepts until the river takes shape and creates inverted mountains to aid its way down to the sea or directly to the clouds, from where it drops to the mountains again." End quote. The simile is striking, but I don't want to leave it there. Hanley's attention to the force of place insists that we are dealing with more than metaphor. The soul names both the body's place and that body's being placed. There are no souls without bodies, but a body in itself is a wire unplugged. Souls socket bodies into the place of their time. It is in this sense Hanley suggests that, quote, "geography teaches us the first lessons of being," end quote, that every kind of being involves a being there. This fits with Mormonism's own original take on the soul. Sometimes we use the word soul like everyone else, but sometimes we don't. Doctrine and Covenants 88:15 gives the term a twist, quote, "The spirit and the body are the soul of man," end quote. Where Plato's soul is, above all else, indivisible, Joseph gives it as composite. Soul names the body's being there with a spirit, and given that the separation of body and spirit is death, the soul, this being therewith of a body and spirit, is synonymous with life. We might take the idea one step further. In Mormon parlance, the separation of body and spirit is physical death, but the separation of my spirit from the presence of God is spiritual death. Eternal life, spiritual life, depends on my spirit's being there with God's spirit. Eternal life sparks when body sockets into spirit that sockets into spirit. This compounding togetherness is the essence of a soul. Souls are the taking place of this shared life. They are the there of our being there. There is no salvation without this shared place or promised land. Sin, on the other hand, displaces us. All sinners are expatriates, not because they've left some particular place behind, but because they've come ungrounded from place altogether. As sinners, we no longer know where we are. We no longer feel earth beneath our feet, smell rain in the air, or stain our hands with walnut hulls. Sky turns unnoticed. Religion, then, is revealed geography. Angels, when they come from the presence of God, do as Moroni did for Joseph Smith. They point to the ground and say, "Here." Attention to place involves not just attention to landscape, but to the body as well. The body is the place where life happens. While the soul is the place of the body localizes the extended geography of the soul. Quote, "The body is the cup in which to drink the world." End quote. This cup always runs over, but without the body, life won't hold water. We stuff, abuse, and ignore our bodies at our own peril. The soul, as watershed, feeds the body's current through the capillaries, rivulets, and transepts of sensation. In order to be here, quote, sensation is what one needs, end quote. A respiring body, a sweating body, a wind-chapped body, a sun-kissed body is what one needs, a body in open air. We forfeit our souls, our place, if our bodies become just, quote, excess baggage, things to be maintained so that we can continue to live as if they were irrelevant, as if we were not embodied biological matter, end quote. Handley climbs mountains to pace out the dimensions of his watershed, and it's the work imposed by the slope that wakes him to it. The mountain, he says, stirs me from strange and varied slumbers of the body. Awakening to our bodies is the key to awakening to our place. None of this is to deny that we are insufficient vessels, that our bodies are, quote, not built to withstand even the daily tremors beauty offers, end quote. But this insufficiency, this dependence of the river on a watershed that spreads from view is the whole point. The body that I am, the repetition of blood, faith, and sin that I am, is necessitated only by this insufficiency. This insufficiency is the tie that binds body to a place and parent to child. A soul is the sharing of this insufficiency in a common place. It's the wakeful shouldering of its burden from one body to the next. Earth is stratified time, the past piled up in place. Use some wind, water, and pressure, sift it, layer it, and fold it. Add an inhuman number of years. Stack and buckle these plains of rock into mountains of frozen time. Use a river to cleave that mountain in two. Hide hundreds of millions of purloined years in plain simultaneous sight as a single massive bluff. It's a good trick. Bodies made of earth are just the same. In my face, generations of people are stratified in plain simultaneous sight. My father's nose, my grandfather's ears, my mother's wink, the lines my kids have etched into my squint. My wife pats my cheek and says, "Dear, your genealogy is showing." She's right. The lines on my face and in the palms of my hands are family lines. But these lines aren't easy to follow because, counter to expectation, time's line isn't straight. Time is composed not only of necessities, but of repetitions and contingencies that make it loop around, knot up, peter out, and jump ahead. Time moves and fits and starts. Its straight-shot inevitability is tempered by the meandering play of accident and coincidence. Handley finds the same thing. Alone in the family cabin, he tries sorting out his family lines. He's got rolls of genealogy, quote, full names, dates, and locations of birth, dates of death, each name, like myself, a knot of time and flesh, end quote. These knots are tough to untangle, because life is not the line, but its skein. Quote, there are simply too many tangentials and too many generations in the past that must exhaust us and be arbitrarily ignored to create the impression that families are lines at all, and not wide webs, connected below the surface of time like that grove of aspen trees out my window, breathing in the same nutrients through the same shared root system, end quote. Here stately family trees turn out to be more like thorny briar patches, and if we're going to talk not about oaks but briars, we may as well just be honest and make room for sun, rain, and dirt. Who can draw a bright line between what lives life and what gives it? Plotting these family histories, we're going to need more paper. Quote, if genealogy teaches us anything, it's how narrow and contingent our understanding of kinship is, end quote. The illusion that I'm simply me, free of ecology, independent of pedigree, is just another variation on the illusion that only the dramatic events in our lives, or notable names in our trees, are decisive. Everyone wants King George for a second uncle, but your kinship with a diabetic great-aunt, a charwoman, will probably have more sway. This kind of great man history squeezes off stage the ordinary and tangential that compose the bulk of our lives. A more faithful family history would have to be much more modest. We're wading in the muck of a river here, poking in its rushes with a stick, not digging an irrigation ditch with the industrial reach of an excavator. Hanley turns and returns in the course of Home Waters to the abrupt tragedy of his brother's suicide. Like a stiff punch in the eye, this death leaves Hanley seeing stars, and rightly so. He can't help but finger the deep, tender bruise and wonder how this life and its passing have shaped his own. But this bruise is not mine, and in the end I am just as interested in all the room that Hanley's book purposefully gives to a colleague, a gas station attendant, a peach farmer, a soccer mom, and a hiking buddy, his accidental companions, his collateral pedigree, tossed together by circumstance and offered as oblique recompense. Whether our lives are filled with or bereft of spirit depends on learning how to see these small, unrequested contingencies of time, place, and family as a grace rather than a spoil. Doing this means learning, quote, something about how to assent to circumstance, how to live within constraints of place and culture, and then maybe we will know the depth of extended mercy, end quote. Of his awakening, the 13th century Zen master Eihi Dogen says, quote, I came to realize clearly that mind is no other than mountains and rivers and the great wide earth, the sun and the moon and the stars. Tinged with enlightenment, you see what Dogen saw, that life is borrowed, and that mind itself is mooched. Mind borrows mountains and rivers, earth, sun, and sky. But you can't just keep these things forever. Even if they weren't quite what you wanted, they gave what they had, and now some compensation is needed. Some recompense is required. Recompense is payback, Hanley says. It means to weigh together, to bring back into balance. What was loaned must be returned or replaced. What was given must be given back. Nobody gets to start from scratch, not even God. To make a world is to borrow, recycle, and repurpose the matter that, even if disorganized, is already out there, mattering. All creation is reorganization. Even the mind of God must mooch its mountains, cajole them, persuade them, serve them, compensate them. This is messy, and its messiness is compounded by the fact that everything is in motion. Nothing is still, Hanley reminds us. Nothing can be still because recompense is itself never done. Recompense compels the world's motion. Everything is in play as everything borrows from everything else, in giant, intermittently harmonious rounds of exchange, compromise, and negotiation. Leaves borrow light, cows borrow leaves, people borrow cows, worms borrow people, etc. The world is the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Everyone's a broker, and the closing bell never gets rung. The whole thing echoes Anaximander's famous lines, quote, whence things have their origin, thence also their destruction happens, according to necessity. For they give to each other justice and recompense for their injustice, in conformity with the ordinance of time. End quote. This is the world in a nutshell. It will die if it stops swimming. Hanley sees it. He goes fly fishing, but, quote, every time I step off the bank and into the water, the shape of the current is noticeably different. The water has risen or fallen. It's muddied, olive, or amber. The bank's carved differently than before. End quote. Every time he wades in, something new has been borrowed, added, or traded away. But rivers are a cheap example. Take the mighty mountain instead. Hanley sees it here, too, quote, mountains as landmarks belie what any hiker or anyone with the eyes of an impressionist knows, that a mountain never retains the same shape. There are as many mountains as there are steps it takes to climb them, or as there are angles of sun and shifts in the weather. End quote. To climb a mountain is to negotiate its shifting face. You can borrow a handhold here in exchange, quid pro quo, for breaking up some ice over there. Mountains and rivers both wake Hanley's mind to the fundamental recognition of an ongoing creation. They wake him to the recognition that creation must be ongoing, because creation is compensation. Everything must always start again, and again, and again, because all the debt is shared. We've borrowed against our own lives. and what we're borrowing is each other. This is where things get sticky, where we begin to hear more clearly a call for repentance in our talk of recompense. We should do unto others as we would have them do unto us, because we will all, inevitably, necessarily, repeatedly, be doing it unto each other. We will all impose on, borrow from, use up, and trade away parts of one another. Every one will be both repurposed and get repurposed. Obvious problems result from all this claim jumping. You will get borrowed as something you didn't want to be, and you will have to borrow stuff that isn't exactly what you wanted. Either way, our shared lives are such that the potential for offense abounds. In response to these offenses, forgiveness must be understood as more than an occasional virtue. It must be cultivated as a baseline disposition. You will be forgiven only as you forgive. You will get lots of practice. The world will resist you. It will exceed your grasp. It will practice indifference toward you. Like a borrowed shirt, it will fit you imperfectly. It will be loose in the neck, short in the cuff, and the tag will itch. The world will irritate you, bruise you, thwart you, anger you. In the end, it will even, at least for a time, kill you. Suffering the indignity of these rounds, you will, by default, be tempted to just flit from one offense to the next, simmering in frustration, stewing in quiet desperation. But to live, you will have to let these offenses go. You will have to learn how to make and accept recompense. You will have to forget the fiction of cash equivalencies and barter with whatever is at hand. You didn't get what you wanted, or even what you needed. Your life was repurposed by others for something other than what you had in mind. Join the party. I'm sympathetic, but in the end these objections are going nowhere. That bus, while always idling, never actually leaves the station. You presume a world that doesn't exist, and you fantasize a fixer God who, unlike ours, is himself doing something other than divinely serving, borrowing, and repurposing. Ask instead, what were you given? Where were you taken? What was your recompense? Learn to like lemonade. But you had plans. You didn't want that recompense. Do not be so proud. You have done to others just the same. You have, in turn, taken, borrowed, and appropriated, and probably with quite a bit less grace and restraint. What have you taken, and what cost? What recompense have you been withholding from whom? You've been using up mountains and trees, the great wide earth, the sun, the moon, the stars. You've been drinking the rivers dry. You've been repurposing your spouse, your children, your parents, your friends. You've borrowed and wasted at your convenience. You've squeezed hard, turned their cheek for them, and then squeezed again. Nursing grievances, you've justified such actions with more accusations, and often enough even invoked God in your own defense. This, Hanley suggests, is a kind of ecological apostasy. For my part, I doubt there is any other kind. We need to wake up to the recompense of what has been given. We need to freely offer that recompense in return. We need, as Hanley advocates with a borrowed phrase, to learn to think like a mountain.
That was Adam Miller reading 2 chapters from his book, Rube Goldberg Machines, Essays in Mormon Theology, available in paperback at gregkofford.com.